The Vikings. To most of us, that word still conjures the same images. Roaring warriors, longships slicing through gray seas, and mead-soaked halls echoing with laughter and song. But beneath that legend, beneath the stories of courage and conquest, lay a much darker world. A world where justice was not blind, it was bloody, where dishonor, theft, betrayal, or mere bad luck could end not with a trial, but with a scream that froze in the Nordic wind. They called it law. We might call it terror. Some of these punishments are recorded in Icelandic sagas, others in medieval chronicles, and a few are hinted at in bones unearthed from burial mounds. But all of them tell us one truth. In the Viking world, death wasn't just about ending a life. It was about making an example. And tonight, we descend into that world. The 7 most horrific execution methods of the Viking Age. The first comes straight from the sagas themselves, whispered in half-belief, the blood eagle. It begins with betrayal, often of kin or king. The condemned is dragged to a flat stone, face down, arms spread wide like a bird about to take flight. The executioner's blade splits open the back, carving through ribs from the spine outward. Then, with almost ritual precision, the ribs are pulled apart, peeled back, to resemble wings. The lungs are drawn through the openings, 2 pale, trembling things. It's said the victim was kept alive long enough to feel the cold air against that raw, open cavity. The sagas claim that only those who betrayed their own blood deserved this fate. Men like Halfdan Longleg or Ella of Northumbria, but historians debate whether it ever truly happened. No archaeological evidence confirms it. Maybe it was a poetic invention, a metaphor for vengeance so gruesome that it bled into legend. Yet even if it was myth, the fear it carried was real, because the idea of the blood eagle was enough to terrify enemies before any sword was drawn. The second method was far less ornate, but far more common: hanging. Every Viking town had its gallows hill, the Galgbakken, often built just outside the settlement. According to law codes like the Gragas, hanging was the standard punishment for murderers, thieves, and runaway slaves. But this wasn't a quick drop with a snapped neck like later European hangings. No, the Vikings preferred a slow suffocation. The condemned was strung up by a rope looped over a tree branch, feet sometimes brushing the ground. In some accounts, relatives of the victim were invited to strike or mock the hanging body. A grim community theater of vengeance. Even Odin, the god of wisdom, was said to have hanged himself on the world tree, Yggdrasil, to gain knowledge. That symbolism made hanging more than punishment. It was sacrifice. It was cosmic order restored by rope. The third method was drowning, a punishment reserved for women, according to several sagas. When a woman was accused of adultery, infanticide, or sorcery, she could be tied into a sack, sometimes with a stone or a serpent, and thrown into deep water. In Icelandic law, this was called drekking. A few remote pools still bear names like Drekking Arhalur, the drowning pool, reminders of this cruel ritual. Imagine that cold northern water closing over you, lungs burning, knowing that your name would never even be carved on a stone. In Norse belief, those who died by drowning did not go to Valhalla. They were denied the warrior's afterlife, cast adrift forever. That perhaps was the true punishment, not death itself, but exile from the honor of dying well. The fourth was burning. Arson was a crime of passion in Viking society, and often punished in kind. The Njals saga tells of houses set ablaze, with entire families trapped inside, vengeance turned into inferno. Sometimes those convicted of treachery or witchcraft were bound inside wooden huts or ships and burned alive. One chronicler wrote of a condemned sorcerer whose screams echoed across the fjord until the roof collapsed. Archaeological layers at Borg and Kaupang show traces of charred human remains mixed with collapsed domestic structures, possibly executions by fire. Whether sanctioned by law or fueled by mob rage, fire was cleansing, final, and public. The fifth, and perhaps the most psychologically cruel, was exposure. To be outlawed in Viking society was worse than to be killed. The outlegged meant you were cast out beyond the protection of law. Anyone could kill you, and no one could avenge you. Sometimes the condemned were stripped, branded as outlaws, and left in the wilderness to die from wolves, cold, or starvation. There are sagas where exiles wander the snow-covered highlands, hearing the distant howls of animals as the night closed in. Some even begged for death rather than that slow fading into nothing. Exposure wasn't just execution, it was erasure. The sixth was beheading, swift, efficient, but never merciful. The Vikings considered decapitation a noble death, usually reserved for warriors or high-born offenders. In some graves, archaeologists have found skulls placed neatly beside the torso, a sign, perhaps, of execution. But even here, there was theater. In one saga, a woman named Aud insisted on watching her husband's beheading to ensure it was clean. The executioner raised his axe, the edge flashing in torchlight, and the head rolled into the dirt. The Norse saw the head as powerful, capable of speech after death, a vessel of identity. The idea of separating it from the body carried both reverence and dread. And then there's the seventh, a punishment so vile, so degrading, that it barely made it into written record. Impalement. According to some medieval sources, particularly Adam of Bremen and later Saxo Grammaticus, impalement was known among northern tribes for traitors and oath-breakers. The condemned was forced onto a sharpened stake, which was then raised upright. Death could take hours, sometimes days. Modern historians argue whether this was truly Viking or a later Christian embellishment meant to depict pagans as savages. But skeletal evidence from certain Swedish bogs, pelvises pierced by wood fragments, suggests it may not have been myth after all. So there you have them, 7 deaths across a single culture, each with its own logic. Blood eagle, hanging, drowning, burning, exposure, beheading, impalement. But the deeper question is, why such cruelty? Some historians, like Neil Price, argue that Viking punishment wasn't senseless brutality. It was symbolic. The body was seen as a message. A hanged man reminded others of Odin's sacrifice. A drowned woman cleansed the sin of forbidden power. A flayed or impaled traitor declared that betrayal cut deeper than flesh. Every act of pain was also an act of storytelling. We tend to imagine Vikings as one people, but their world was vast, from Iceland's isolated farms to the bustling trade ports of Denmark and Sweden. Justice in one place might mean exile, in another, death by fire. Their laws evolved with time. What began as vengeance became ritualized punishment. Even the sagas, written centuries later, blurred fact and legend until cruelty took on the weight of myth. What's fascinating and disturbing is how these ancient methods echo across time. The blood eagle may have faded into metaphor, but its spirit lingers in the way power performs punishment even today. Public, theatrical, meant to send a message. Maybe that's the real horror here. Not the iron, or fire, or rope, but the human need to make suffering meaningful. And perhaps, in some twisted way, that's what made Viking executions endure in memory. They didn't just kill the body, they branded the soul. History doesn't sanitize these things. It remembers them because we need to. Because every time we think of justice, we should remember the cost of cruelty paraded as order. If this kind of history speaks to you, the dark, the forgotten, the truths most books only whisper, then stay with us. There's so much more buried beneath the centuries, waiting to be unearthed.